I want both you and Brandon. Why not just stay my safety net? My girlfriend smirked. So I disappeared overnight and left only one note. Now her mom calls daily. Hello everyone, before we get into the video, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the like button if you want more content like this. Thank you. I never wanted to go to that reunion, but my college roommate Mike guilt-tripped me into it, saying I'd been holed up coding for too long and needed to remember what sunlight looks like. 3 hours into the overcrowded hotel ballroom filled with people desperately trying to prove their post-graduation success, I was already planning my escape when I heard this laugh that cut through all the noise like it owned the place. That's when I saw Samantha Chen for the first time since sophomore year, holding court near the bar with 5 people hanging on her every word, gesturing with wine glass in hand like she was conducting an orchestra of her own making. She'd always been magnetic in college, the kind of person who could walk into any room and instantly become its center of gravity, but now there was this polished confidence about her that made everyone else look like they were trying too hard. David Martinez, the mysterious coder who actually made something of himself, she said when she spotted me lurking by the appetizer table, abandoning her audience without a second thought to make her way over. We ended up talking for 3 hours straight, sitting on the hotel's outdoor terrace while everyone else networked inside, reminiscing about Professor Henderson's impossible algorithms class and that time the entire computer lab crashed during finals week. You were always different from the rest of them, she told me, leaning closer as the night air got cooler, refreshingly genuine while everyone else was putting on shows and pretending to be something they weren't. I found out she'd moved to Seattle 2 years ago to start her own event coordination business, specializing in luxury weddings for tech executives and venture capitalists, the kind of high-end affairs where flowers cost more than most people's cars and every detail had to be absolutely perfect. I'm good at making people feel special on their most important day, she explained, but the business side is killing me slowly, all these booking systems and client management databases that I can barely figure out. When she mentioned struggling with her digital infrastructure, something clicked in my brain the same way it did when I solved a particularly complex coding problem. I could probably help you with that, I offered, already mentally designing a streamlined booking system that could automate most of her administrative headaches. Her face lit up like I'd just offered to solve world hunger. Really? You do that for me? Within 2 weeks, we were officially dating, and I was spending every evening and weekend building her dream business platform from scratch. I created a custom booking system that managed client inquiries, automated her scheduling, integrated payment processing, and even built her a mobile app that let brides track every detail of their wedding planning in real time. The whole digital infrastructure took me 3 months of unpaid nights and weekends, but seeing her excitement as each feature came online made every hour worth it. You're amazing, she'd say, bringing me coffee while I debugged her client database at 2 a.m. I don't know what I did to deserve someone who actually cares about my success. I designed custom forms for vendor management, built automated email sequences for client communication, and even created a social media integration that posted her work automatically across 5 platforms. Her business exploded almost overnight, bookings tripled, her Instagram following went from 800 to 12,000, and suddenly she was coordinating weddings for Microsoft executives and Amazon directors. David built this entire system for me, she'd tell her clients proudly. He's basically the tech genius behind everything. I felt genuinely useful for the first time in years, like my skills were building something meaningful instead of just debugging corporate software that nobody cared about, and watching Samantha transform from struggling entrepreneur to Seattle's most sought-after wedding planner felt like the best project I'd ever completed. 6 months into what I thought was our perfect partnership, the first cracks started showing, and they all seemed to revolve around Brandon Reeves, a wedding photographer from Miami who specialized in what Samantha called destination luxury experiences. She'd met him through an industry networking group, and suddenly his name was dropping into every conversation like he was the missing piece to her business puzzle. Brandon thinks I should expand into corporate retreats, she'd say over dinner, her phone buzzing constantly with his messages that she'd glance at mid-sentence, her attention splitting between our conversation and whatever wisdom he was dispensing from 3 time zones away. These weren't occasional business calls, they were nightly strategy sessions that lasted until 1 a.m., with Samantha pacing around our shared downtown loft in yoga pants, laptop open, talking about brand positioning and market penetration like she was planning military operations. It's just professional, she'd insist when I mentioned that most business partnerships didn't require quite that level of after-hours consultation. Brandon understands the luxury market in ways that Seattle photographers just don't. The irony wasn't lost on me that while she was getting business advice from Miami, I was still the one debugging her booking system when it crashed and updating her client database when she accidentally deleted important files. Brandon's Instagram was everything mine wasn't: sun-soaked beach weddings, yacht receptions, couples kissing against backdrops of Art Deco hotels, all shot with the kind of dramatic lighting that made ordinary moments look like movie scenes. Meanwhile, my social media consisted of hiking photos and the occasional picture of code that I thought was particularly elegant, which probably explained why Samantha stopped tagging me in her posts around the same time Brandon started appearing in her stories. The financial strain started showing up in subtle ways that I initially dismissed as normal business fluctuations, but looking back, the timing was suspiciously convenient. Wedding season cash flow is really tight right now, she explained when rent was due and she was $1,200 short. All my payments are tied up in vendor deposits and client escrow accounts. I covered her half without question, figuring temporary business challenges were part of supporting someone building their dream, but the next day she posted an Instagram story from a $300 spa day with the caption, "Self-Care Sunday because you can't pour from an empty cup." 2 weeks later, it was another $800 shortfall because a client payment was delayed, followed immediately by photos of a designer handbag she'd bought to celebrate closing a major deal. The math wasn't adding up, but I kept telling myself that successful entrepreneurs sometimes had unconventional financial patterns that someone like me, with my steady salary and predictable expenses, couldn't fully understand. Her college friends, especially Nina from her old sorority, started making comments that felt increasingly pointed during our group dinners, subtle digs wrapped in fake concern that left me feeling like I was failing some test I didn't know I was taking. "Samantha, you work so hard, you deserve someone who can keep up with your energy level," Nina would say, shooting meaningful glances my way while describing some adventure she'd had with her venture capitalist boyfriend. "I mean, David's sweet, but he's so cerebral, you know? All that computer stuff." The conversations always seemed to circle back to Brandon, with Nina and the others gushing about his latest Instagram posts from some beachside wedding in the Keys. "He's such an artist," they'd say. "Total eye candy too, not like these tech bros who spend all day staring at screens." I'd sit there eating overpriced appetizers, watching Samantha's face light up whenever Brandon's name came up, and wondering when exactly I'd become the code monkey in her circle's vocabulary instead of the guy who'd built her entire business infrastructure from scratch. The worst part wasn't the money or even the constant phone calls, it was the gradual shift in how she looked at me, like I was a reliable appliance that handled important but boring functions while the exciting stuff happened elsewhere. The trip to Miami was Samantha's idea, positioned as her biggest networking opportunity of the year, and a chance for me to finally meet the famous Brandon whose name had become a permanent fixture in our conversations. "This rooftop event is going to be incredible," she explained while booking my flight. "All the top wedding vendors in the Southeast, potential clients with unlimited budgets, and Brandon's hosting it at this exclusive bar downtown that you literally can't get into without connections." I should have realized something was off when she seemed more excited about me meeting her business contacts than spending a romantic weekend together, but I was still operating under the assumption that we were building something as a team. The rooftop bar was everything she'd promised: sleek glass railings, panoramic views of Biscayne Bay, beautiful people sipping craft cocktails that cost more than most people's hourly wage, and Brandon holding court near the main bar like he owned the place. He was exactly what I'd expected from his Instagram presence. Tall, perpetually tanned, with that casual confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong somewhere. "So you're the tech wizard I keep hearing about," he said when Samantha introduced us, his handshake lasting exactly long enough to be polite but not long enough to suggest genuine interest. Within 10 minutes of our arrival, Samantha had disappeared into the crowd of wedding professionals, leaving me to nurse an overpriced whiskey while pretending to enjoy conversations about destination photography and luxury venue trends. I was checking my phone near one of the decorative pillars, probably looking as out of place as I felt, when I heard Samantha's distinctive laugh coming from the other side of the column. "I honestly don't know why I can't just have both," she was saying to Nina and another woman I didn't recognize, her voice carrying that slightly breathless excitement she got when she'd had a few drinks. My finger was hovering over my Uber app when her next words stopped me cold. "I mean, think about it. David handles all the boring tech stuff and pays for everything when I'm short on cash, and Brandon brings the excitement and adventure that I actually crave." The other woman laughed, saying something I couldn't quite catch, but Samantha's response came through crystal clear. "Why choose? David's like my personal IT support with benefits, always fixing my problems, building whatever I need, never asking for anything back. And Brandon makes me feel alive, like I'm actually living instead of just existing in some suburban tech bubble. Nina's voice was sharp with amusement. So David's your safety net and Brandon's your fantasy? Exactly, Samantha replied without hesitation. David's stability, Brandon's possibility. I want both worlds, so why not just stay my safety net with David while exploring what could happen with Brandon? I stood there for another 30 seconds, listening to them discuss my role in her life like I was a subscription service she was evaluating for cost effectiveness, before something inside me went completely quiet and calm. There was no anger, no urge to storm around the pillar and create a scene, just a crystalline clarity about exactly where I stood in her hierarchy of priorities. I finished my drink, set the glass on a nearby table, and walked directly to the elevator without saying goodbye to anyone. The ride down felt like it took forever, giving me time to process the fact that 3 years of what I thought was building something real had actually been me functioning as unpaid technical support for someone who saw love as a resource to be managed across multiple accounts. I caught the first red-eye back to Seattle, spending the entire flight staring out the window at the lights below, already planning what needed to happen next with the same methodical approach I used for debugging complex systems. By the time we touched down at SeaTac, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was just done, and that felt surprisingly liberating. The beauty of dating someone who overshares every detail of her life on social media is that you always know exactly where she is and how long she'll be gone, which made planning my disappearance significantly easier than it should have been. Samantha's Instagram stories showed her extending her Miami trip by 3 days to maximize networking opportunities and explore some exciting new partnerships, giving me a 72-hour window to execute what I started thinking of as Project Clean Slate. I took 2 personal days from work, telling my manager I had a family emergency that required immediate attention, which wasn't technically a lie since I was about to perform surgery on my own life. The first step was the most satisfying, methodically dismantling every piece of digital infrastructure I'd built for her business over the past year and a half, approaching it with the same systematic precision I used for complex coding projects. I logged into her booking system at 6 a.m. on day 1 and began the process of data export and system shutdown, creating clean backups of her client information before systematically removing my custom code and returning her platforms to their basic default states. The automated scheduling system I'd spent months perfecting simply vanished, along with the custom client management database, the social media integration tools, and the mobile app that had made her business run like clockwork. I wasn't destroying her data, I'm not vindictive, but I was retrieving my intellectual property and leaving her with the same basic tools she'd had before we met, which would be interesting to watch her navigate without her personal IT support. The moving process was surprisingly therapeutic, like deleting unnecessary files from a cluttered hard drive until everything ran clean and efficient again. I'd never accumulated much stuff anyway. My furniture was mostly functional pieces from IKEA, my clothes fit in 3 suitcases, and my electronics packed neatly into labeled boxes that I loaded into a storage unit across town. The shared loft we'd been splitting looked enormous once my presence was completely erased, all the small touches that had made it feel like home, my books, my coffee maker, the second monitor I'd set up in the corner for freelance work, gone without a trace. The Portland transfer was a conversation I'd been putting off for months, but my manager at the software company had been pushing remote work options, and the Oregon branch had been trying to poach me since my last performance review. I need a change of scenery, I told them during the phone call. Family situation requires me to relocate immediately, but I can start working remotely by next week. They were thrilled to keep me on board, especially since I'd been their top performer for 2 consecutive quarters, and within 24 hours I had official paperwork for a transfer that came with a 15% raise to account for Oregon's lower cost of living. The note was the hardest part to get right, and I went through 17 drafts before settling on something that would achieve maximum psychological impact without revealing too much about what I actually knew. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't an emotional reaction or a desperate attempt to get her attention. This was a calculated business decision made by someone who'd finally figured out his actual value proposition. You wanted both worlds. Now you have neither. The choice was always yours, but the consequences are mine to control. I wrote it by hand on plain white paper, the kind of deliberate formality that would make it impossible to dismiss as a text message sent in anger or a hasty email she could rationalize away. The words needed to sound definitive but cryptic enough that she'd obsess over their deeper meaning, because people like Samantha can't resist puzzles, especially ones that center around their own behavior. I left it on the kitchen counter next to the keys to our shared loft, positioned perfectly so it would be the first thing she'd see when she walked through the door, expecting to find me waiting with questions about her extended Miami adventure. By Thursday afternoon, I was driving north on I-5 with everything I owned in the back of my Honda Civic, phone switched to a new number, social media accounts deactivated, and my old life disappearing in the rearview mirror like code that had been successfully debugging and archived. I'd blocked her number, her social media, her business accounts, and even her friends' profiles, creating a digital firewall that was probably more comprehensive than the security systems I built for Fortune 500 companies. The satisfaction wasn't emotional, it was purely technical, the clean feeling of elegant problem-solving when you've identified the root cause of system instability and eliminated it with surgical precision. Portland welcomed me with gray skies and coffee shops on every corner, and I spent my first week in a downtown hotel, working remotely while apartment hunting and marveling at how quiet my phone had become without the constant buzz of someone else's crisis management needs. 3 months into my Portland life, I was settling into a routine that felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in years: remote work from a bright apartment in the Pearl District, weekend rock climbing sessions at Smith Rock, and Tuesday evening hikes with a group of fellow tech transplants who'd all come to Oregon seeking something more genuine than the startup hustle culture we'd left behind. My promotion to senior developer came with a 25% salary bump and the kind of challenging projects that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with coding in the first place: building systems that actually mattered instead of debugging someone else's perpetual chaos. The hiking group was where I first heard about Samantha's digital meltdown, though I didn't realize it at the time. "You guys have to see this," said Claire, a UX designer from San Francisco who'd moved to Portland for similar reasons, showing us her phone during our post-hike coffee stop. This woman posted a handwritten note on Instagram asking people to help her decode what her ex meant, and the comments are absolutely unhinged. I glanced at the screen she was holding up and felt a familiar jolt of recognition, my own handwriting staring back at me from her Instagram post, surrounded by hundreds of comments from strangers offering interpretations of my deliberately cryptic goodbye message. The caption read, "Can anyone help me understand what this means? My ex left this note and I can't figure out what he's trying to tell me. The words feel important, but I'm missing something. Please share your thoughts. I need closure." What followed was a digital archaeological dig that would have been fascinating if it weren't so pathetic: comment after comment of amateur psychologists and relationship experts dissecting every word choice, punctuation mark, and spacing decision like they were analyzing ancient hieroglyphics. Some people thought it was romantic, others called it manipulative, but most seemed to agree that posting private correspondence online for strangers to interpret made her look desperate rather than sympathetic. "The choice was always yours, but the consequences are mine to control," one commenter had highlighted. "This sounds like someone who's done playing games and is taking back their power." Another had written, "He's telling you that he knew about whatever you did, and instead of fighting about it, he just removed himself from the equation. That's actually pretty mature." Claire was laughing as she scrolled through the responses. "I mean, I feel bad for her, but who posts their breakup notes on social media? That's like asking the internet to analyze your diary entries." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally marveling at how perfectly my plan had worked. The note wasn't just haunting her, it was consuming her to the point where she'd crowdsourced her obsession with thousands of strangers. Through Mike, my old college roommate who still lived in Seattle, I learned that the note had become the centerpiece of Samantha's entire post-breakup narrative, analyzed endlessly with her friends over wine-fueled therapy sessions that accomplished nothing except reinforcing her fixation on finding hidden meanings that didn't exist. She hired a private investigator, Mike told me during one of our monthly check-in calls, his voice equal parts amused and concerned. "Apparently she's convinced that you left some kind of coded message that will explain everything if she can just crack it like it's the Da Vinci Code or something." The investigation, according to Mike's girlfriend who moved in the same social circles, had yielded exactly nothing useful. My digital footprint had been so thoroughly scrubbed that I might as well have never existed, and my physical trail ended at a Seattle storage unit that had been paid for 6 months in advance and contained nothing but furniture. Meanwhile, her Miami adventure had imploded spectacularly in ways that satisfied my sense of poetic justice without requiring any effort on my part. Brandon, it turned out, had the attention span of a goldfish when it came to women who brought emotional baggage to what he'd assumed would be a casual fling, and 2 months of listening to Samantha analyze my note had been more than enough to send him running back to his collection of Instagram models and yacht party photography. "She's way too intense," he'd apparently told mutual friends, constantly bringing up this ex who left her some mysterious note, asking me what I think it means, like I'm supposed to be her personal therapist or something. Without Brandon's partnership and my technical infrastructure, her business had started showing serious cracks that no amount of Instagram marketing could paper over: double-booked clients, missed payments, crashed booking systems that she couldn't fix herself, and increasingly frustrated vendors who were tired of dealing with someone who'd clearly lost control of her own operation. The irony was perfect. In trying to have both worlds, she'd ended up with neither, exactly as my note had predicted, and her inability to let go of solving its mystery was preventing her from moving forward in any meaningful way. I was thriving on every level that mattered, building genuine connections with people who valued authenticity over appearance, while she was trapped in a prison of her own making, obsessing over 15 words that had accomplished exactly what they were designed to do. The escalation began around month 4 with a phone call to my old company that I only learned about through my former manager, who reached out on LinkedIn with a message that was equal parts professional courtesy and genuine bewilderment. "Hey David, I hope Portland's treating you well, but I need to give you a heads up about something weird happening here," he wrote. "There's a woman who's been calling HR daily claiming to be your girlfriend's mother, saying there's been a family emergency and she desperately needs to get a message to you. When HR explained you'd transferred and they couldn't give out personal information, she started crying on the phone, saying her daughter hasn't been the same since that note, and begging them to just pass along a phone number." The image of Samantha recruiting her mother as a spokesperson was both pathetic and oddly impressive in its desperation, though I wondered what version of events she'd told her family to justify this level of intervention. According to my ex-manager, Mrs. Chen had called 17 times in 2 weeks, each conversation lasting progressively longer as she tried different approaches with different HR representatives, eventually offering to pay them personally to just send one email on her daughter's behalf. The LinkedIn messages started appearing shortly after, a steady stream of college acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reaching out with transparent attempts to reconnect that always pivoted to asking about my current situation. "Hey David, saw you moved to Portland? So cool. Samantha mentioned you guys weren't in touch anymore and she seemed really worried about you. Everything okay?" These weren't subtle reconnaissance missions. They were amateur-hour detective work that made it obvious someone was orchestrating a campaign to locate me through our mutual network. Mark Chen, no relation to Samantha despite the last name, was probably the most direct. "Dude, Samantha asked me to reach out because she's worried about your mental health after that note you left. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown and wants to help. Can you just call her so she knows you're alive?" The Instagram DMs were more sophisticated but equally transparent, coming from accounts I didn't recognize with profile pictures that looked suspiciously like stock photos and names that felt AI-generated. "Hi, I'm a friend of Samantha's and she's really concerned about you. She just wants to make sure you're safe and happy. Could you please reach out to her? She misses you so much." I didn't respond to any of these messages, but I did screenshot them for my own amusement, creating a digital collection of increasingly desperate outreach attempts that read like a masterclass in what not to do after someone has clearly chosen to cut contact. The handwriting analysis was the point where the situation crossed from pathetic into genuinely unhinged territory, something I discovered through Claire, who'd become fascinated with following this Instagram mystery woman, like it was her personal soap opera. She posted a photo of the note next to some expert analysis she paid for. Claire showed me during one of our hiking trips, and this handwriting specialist wrote 3 paragraphs about how the letter formation indicates controlled emotional detachment and calculated decision-making rather than impulsive anger. The woman spent actual money to have a stranger confirm that you weren't having a breakdown when you wrote it. The analysis apparently concluded that the handwriting showed deliberate spacing and pressure patterns consistent with someone who had reached a logical conclusion rather than an emotional breaking point, which was probably the most accurate assessment anyone had made of my mental state during the entire ordeal. Samantha had posted the analysis with a caption asking if anyone else thought it meant I was still processing my feelings and might be open to communication, completely missing the point that deliberate detachment was the opposite of emotional confusion. The fake social media profiles were easier to spot than she probably realized, mainly because whoever was creating them had no understanding of how actual people behave online. "Hey David, found your profile through mutual friends. Would love to catch up. I'm in Portland too and heard you moved here recently." These accounts invariably had 3 followers, no posts, and profile photos that looked like they'd been selected specifically to appeal to straight men, suggesting that Samantha had either hired someone to create them or was operating under some seriously misguided assumptions about my personality. What she didn't realize was that I'd gone completely dark on social media, deleting my accounts entirely rather than just blocking her, so she was essentially shouting into a void that no longer existed. The private investigator's success in tracking down my Portland address was actually impressive, though it came about 6 months too late to be useful. I learned about the visit from my old landlord, who called to let me know someone had been asking questions about my lease and leaving notes under my door. Woman showed up with some official-looking credentials claiming she needed to verify your residence for legal purposes, he explained. But when I told her you'd moved out 2 months ago and left no forwarding address, she got pretty emotional about it. Samantha had apparently left a handwritten letter at my old apartment, sealed in an envelope with, "Please forward to David Martinez, urgent personal matter," written across the front in the same careful handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists. The landlord offered to mail it to me, but I declined, explaining that whatever was inside wasn't something I needed to read to move forward with my life. By that point, I was already settled into my new situation, a remote cabin outside of Hood River with fiber internet that let me freelance for tech companies across 3 time zones, rock climbing access that made my weekends feel like permanent vacation, and a lifestyle so far removed from my old existence that Samantha's investigation was tracking a person who effectively no longer existed. 2 years later, I was standing in a Napa Valley vineyard wearing a suit that actually fit, sporting a beard that had taken months to grow properly, and feeling more like myself than I had in years when I spotted her across the reception area at Mike's destination wedding. Grace was beside me, elegant in a navy dress that complemented her natural confidence, discussing wine varietals with the bride's family like she'd been part of our social circle forever instead of the 6 months we'd been dating. Samantha looked smaller than I remembered, dressed in what was clearly an expensive outfit that somehow looked desperate rather than sophisticated, her eyes scanning the crowd with the restless energy of someone who'd never learned to be comfortable in her own company. She spotted me during the cocktail hour, her face cycling through surprise, recognition, and something that looked almost like panic before settling into the artificial smile I remembered from networking events. "David," she said, approaching with the careful steps of someone crossing a minefield, "I can't believe you're here. You look different. Good different." I introduced Grace with the easy familiarity of someone who'd found their actual person, watching Samantha's expression shift as she processed that I wasn't alone and wasn't available for whatever conversation she'd been rehearsing for 2 years. "Grace is a UX designer," I explained. "She's been helping some startups in Portland redesign their user experience architecture." Grace smiled warmly and extended her hand, displaying the kind of genuine social confidence that doesn't need to dominate a room to be effective. "Nice to meet you, Samantha. David's mentioned you before." The conversation felt surreal, like debugging old code that you'd written years ago and could barely remember the logic behind, but Samantha clearly hadn't moved on from analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings. "David, could I talk to you privately for just a minute?" she asked, her voice carrying that brittle urgency I recognized from her crisis management mode. "There's something I really need to ask you about." Grace squeezed my arm gently and said she'd go find us more wine, understanding without explanation that this was something I needed to handle alone, which was exactly the kind of emotional intelligence that had made me fall for her in the first place. Samantha led me to a quieter corner of the vineyard, her hands fidgeting with her clutch like she was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. "I need to know what that note really meant," she said without any preamble. "I've been trying to figure it out for 2 years and I can't let it go until I understand what you were trying to tell me." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the genuine desperation in her voice, the way she'd clearly been carrying this obsession like a weight that had worn her down. "The note meant exactly what it said," I replied calmly. "You wanted to control both relationships, so I removed myself entirely, giving you neither." Her face crumpled slightly, like she'd been expecting some deeper revelation that would unlock years of confusion. "But there had to be more to it than that. The way you wrote it, the specific words you chose, what did you really mean about consequences being yours to control?" The answer came to me with the same clarity I'd felt that night in Miami, watching her reduce our entire relationship to a resource management problem. "It meant I finally understood that you saw love as a resource to be managed across multiple accounts, but I closed mine permanently. The note wasn't cryptic, Samantha. It was just the final output from someone you never bothered to understand." She stared at me like I'd spoken in code again, her mouth opening and closing as she processed words that were apparently too simple to satisfy her need for complexity. "That's it? That's really all it meant? That's all it ever meant? You were looking for hidden messages in a straightforward goodbye because you couldn't accept that someone would just walk away without drama or negotiation." I could see Grace approaching with our wine glasses, her presence a gentle reminder that I had somewhere better to be. "Take care of yourself, Samantha," I said, already turning to rejoin the celebration, leaving her standing alone among the grapevines, finally understanding that some systems, once deleted, have no backup.